Hello, everybody who joined us and who will be watching this session later on from home, whether you're in Europe or in the United States or in other places. Sometimes we have people who are joining us from Australia. My name is Yair, and welcome to this special international session that we have two guests, researchers from Denmark, who live in Denmark. One of them is from Northern Ireland, and we have a lot of things to cover. We basically invited them for their research, but we also want to hear their experiences about what is happening in different countries than ours. We're kind of in our micro bubble of what's happening in Pennsylvania and in the United States. So we really want to see what is happening in other places, because really the same problems that we're facing in the United States are happening all over the world. So I'm going to introduce in a couple of minutes Katie, but from PA Unplugged, one of the founders of PA Unplugged. And she's going to tell you a little bit about what she's doing and introduce Trini and David, who we're really excited to have you here. But I think that I wanted to start with just a couple of things. And something that happened to me personally in the last 48 hours, and actually last 24 hours. This is on social media. I try not to be too much on social media on Facebook, but sometimes I use it, and even like publishing and promoting events like this and other stuff that I do in cardiology and whatnot. But something really caught my attention in the last 24 hours. It was two comments on two different, one, post of somebody on a personal chat, on a chat that he just posted, and a friend, Facebook friend, and another one on a group that I'm part of in the neighborhood, or in the township, I should say. And both of these comments were made by one individual, in each case. And it was related to something related to education, one of them in schools. The other one was related to protests that we're currently having in the last 24 hours against Trump. But the point was not exactly the comment. The point is that as a result of the initial comment on social media, I have witnessed hundreds, if not more, of comments that I looked at and I just couldn't believe it. I believed it because I see it all the time in the last, I don't know how many years, but it just it caught my attention because these were comments that made by people who don't know each other. They may be neighbors, they may live in the same state, the same city, but these comments on both sides of the spectrum, political, right and left, were just so vicious to each other. So much anger and hatred and name calling, in a name that you don't know that person, and you're just basically making all these assumptions. And that made me think about how social media, I mean, we see this all the time, and it's so harmful for adults. What is the chance of our children who are 12 years old or 14 years old on Snapchat, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on whatever, YouTube, on all the social media games, how it can affect them, like mentally and just relationship, the bullying. Anyway, that made me think about kind of the things that your prime minister just mentioned a few days ago, and we'll talk about it. The second thing that I wanted to mention before I introduce Katie is that this is really not like we're not, and some people I'm hearing that even the last few days, that the people who are talking about smartphones and schools and whatnot are some sort of like an anti-technology cult. And it's really important to mention that we are not. And I personally just moderated this morning, 6 hours ago or so, a big session of over 250 cardiologists about cardiology imaging and AI. I am one of the leaders in the field in my system, and I do a lot of work in the space of AI. I think it's amazing tools. But maybe because I'm so familiar and I use it, I'm also very cautious and mindful of the potential harm that it can cause children. So anyway, I just wanted to start with these, two little things. And I'm going to hand it to Katie. So Katie Tallarico is a certified digital wellness educator. She's obviously a parent. She's a former teacher as well. And she's very passionate about healthy child development. She, some of us like myself started advocating in the last 6 months, last year, maybe the last 2 years after the book of Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. But she has been realizing that we have a problem and started advocating in this space over a decade ago, in 2015, when her daughter was given an iPad at school. And she was like, why an iPad? And she wasn't just accepting it as it is, but she started thinking about, do we really need it? What is the impact on the children? She's been a member of multiple work groups through Screen Time Action Network at Fair Play since, inception in 2018. She's also co-lead and one of the founders of the PA Unplugged, focusing on early childhood. She also created a free resource called Let's Grow Brain Power to help schools and community groups educate and empower kids and families to reduce the childhood screen time. So with that, it's my honor to introduce Katie. And please go ahead, Katie.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. A huge storm just is erupting outside my window, so I hope I don't lose power or something like that. But um, assuming everything will be okay. As Yair mentioned, yes, I'm one of the co-founders of Pennsylvania Unplugged. We are a statewide coalition of local grassroots movements across the state working for cultural change in how kids and adolescents use smartphones and social media and electronic devices. Our advocacy spans home, school, and community. And currently we have some legislative work. We're very excited about Pennsylvania having 2 bills currently focusing on phone-free schools, one in the House and one in the Senate. And we're also very excited that next week there is a hearing in the Pennsylvania Senate on Bill 1014 for the Senate Education Committee to discuss this bill. It's a very bipartisan bill and already has 20 co-sponsors. So we are really excited about that right now. My work with Pennsylvania Unplugged is really focused on reducing early childhood screen time. And as Yair mentioned, I co-created Let's Grow Brain Power with a friend that I met through Fair Play's Children's Screen Time Action Network. And it's called Let's Grow Brain Power. And it's really a free resource for schools, community groups, waiting rooms, families, anyone who wants to help educate and empower parents to reduce childhood screen time by focusing on what kids really need in order to grow and thrive. We call these the power activities. P stands for play, O stands for outdoors, W stands for work and chores, E stands for engaging with others, and R stands for reading. So we think that, the main idea is that through this Let's Grow Brain Power resource, it has everything that you need to start the program at your own school or group. Basically, that kids and families communally build a Let's Grow Brain Power garden or a Let's Grow Brain Power tree on a bulletin board or in the hallway on a wall somewhere. And basically kids and families write screen-free activities that they've loved or really enjoyed on a petal and add it to a flower in the garden, or alternately on a tree leaf and add it to the tree. So you grow this brain power garden together. So we see Let's Grow Brain Power doing 3 things. It's really a simple and memorable framework that highlights healthy development. So it helps parents think about how to fill their kids' days rather than all the rules about what not to do. It sort of focuses on what to do. It also helps to start the discussion about healthy development and how screens interfere. And third, it's a research-backed way to develop the human skills that we know our kids really need to grow and thrive. So research shows a thinning of white matter in the brains of kids that are exposed excessively to screen time. Well, Let's Grow Brain Power aims to do the opposite and to build brain matter through these human skills. And how does it do that? It gives kids the experiences that they need to build the skills that will help them in real life, no matter what the future brings. Technologies change, but kids' developmental needs do not. So they'll need these human skills like creativity, critical thinking, resilience, empathy, problem solving, no matter what the future looks like. So we'd like to focus on those things. So enough about that. On to our guests today. We're really honored to have both of them here all the way from Denmark. This is one of the benefits of technology that Yair was mentioning. So I'm thrilled to introduce them. First, we have Dr. David Horner. He's a medical doctor originally from Northern Ireland, who's also currently a postdoctoral candidate with the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And he has a keen interest in modifiable determinants of health. And he's also the lead researcher on a groundbreaking study recently published in JAMA, which found that screen time is negatively impacting kids' heart health. Our second guest is Dr. Trina Flensborg Madsen, a professor in the Department of Public Health at the University of Southern Denmark, who holds a special interest in the ways in which psychology and health sciences are entangled and are impacted by social and environmental conditions. So in addition, she's an author on the JAMA study I just mentioned, and she also helped to write Denmark's screen time guidelines. So we'll be talking about these guidelines later in our discussion and also about the new news that Denmark plans to ban social media for all kids under 15. So we'll probably start with Dr. Horner. Dr. Horner, as you know, the research about mental and social emotional health of kids has gotten a lot of attention with regard to how screen time affects it. However, we don't hear much about physical health, but your research, along with some others, brings to light that physical health effects are there. So can you tell us about this groundbreaking study that you've done and some of the main results?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Hi. Thank you for the flattering comments, Katie. I mean, briefly, yeah, I would completely agree. There's lots of studies showing these connections or associations with screen time and mental health. And there's been lots of literature and large review articles sort of summarizing this and showing that these connections seem to be there, but there hasn't been as much with regard to screen time on other health outcomes, such as obesity or cardiovascular disease, or these sort of like this umbrella of cardiometabolic diseases. So I come from a background where I'm super interested in this cardiometabolic space, and this sort of encompasses diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And I'm fortunate enough to have done my PhD at a children's cohort in Denmark. So driven, as you mentioned earlier, by my sort of own interests of early life determinants of health and lifestyle modifying risk factors, I thought it would be super interesting to look at this connection. Because we know that screen time not only robs time from other activities such as physical activity, and we know that children that see a lot of screens also tend to eat more unhealthy and they perhaps sleep less. So I really wanted to look at like, okay, well, independent of all of these other factors, is there anything in itself with screen that sort of maybe showing connections with these type of outcomes? So that was sort of the motivation behind doing this study, and I suppose we could talk more about the details of the particular study. But yeah, two large cohorts of children with over 1,000 kids from the age of like 10 to 18. Yeah, don't know if I
I think
should
we'd
keep on
like to, sorry to interrupt, but I think we would like to jump in. So just my background as a cardiologist, and I'm doing all this social media and stuff and screens on the side, but suddenly I saw in one of the biggest cardiac journals your article, and it was like, wow, I have to talk to this guy and learn about what he's doing. So I'm really interested in maybe learning a little bit more, because it's like there's so many, and this is not a scientific crowd, of course. So but there's so much correlation. Like, how do you maybe teach us more, educate us more about what you found in this amazing Danish, study?
Yeah, so I'm very careful to use the word correlation or association or link, because the type of study that we did is something that in scientific terms you call an observational study. We follow this group of kids, we look at this group of kids. And one of the beautiful things about this study is that we have followed these kids since they were born, all the way through their lives. So we know a lot of stuff about these kids. We know sort of family context, educational levels, income. And we have a lot of these other factors that we know may also play a part in this relationship, because we also know, for example, that perhaps families that are more struggling socially have children that see more screens, whereas more resource strong families perhaps have the resources to send their kids to, I don't know, soccer or other activities that you have to pay for. So we say connection or we say link because we see, whenever we account for all of these other variables, an association, a connection, a link between screen time and these risk factors that we see in early life. So specifically what I mean is that what this paper looked at was we looked at cardiometabolic risk. and that encompasses different factors of what is known as the metabolic syndrome. So that is 3 different blood tests, good cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood glucose, and also looking at blood pressure in early life and looking at waist circumference as a measure of obesity. So we looked at this sort of composite measure, and we found that in both of these cohorts, even after accounting for all of these different lifestyle contextual factors and even accounting for dietary context and physical activity and sleep, we still saw an association for every hour increase in screen time. There was an association between screen time and children having higher risk in this sort of metabolic syndrome, cardiometabolic risk score. So we saw this finding across 2 different groups of children, one around the age of 10 and one at the age of 18. And in the statistical terms for the children, we use this term in science called standard deviations, which describes a movement in this population of children. But you can think of it kind of like a Z-score or a something like this, where it's a movement across a population, and in itself 0.08 for this young group of children and 0.13 for this group of adolescents doesn't sound like a lot. But we know from looking at this data that many of these children were seeing 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of screens a day. So that actually, when you add up this by a 7-fold, let's say if they see 7 hours of screen, that is actually a measurable or a meaningful shift in risk towards that profile. So that was the main finding of the study. There are other sort of other related findings in the study, but that was the main reported finding, where we see this association despite accounting for all of these other sort of contextual lifestyle factors and all these other related lifestyle factors.
Yeah, Dr. Horner, that's so fascinating. I was really interested to read about this study when it first came out. Is there any way you could tell us a little bit more about the screen time associated metabolomic structure? I hope I'm saying that right. I kept saying metabolic structure, but when I look back to the study, it's metabolomic.
Metabolomic. So this was sort of like the kind of last analysis in this paper, but it was sort of motivated by this, throughout the study we were seeing these connections or these associations, and it's you can imagine that this screen time association that we see, it was so robust in both cohorts that I was like, okay, well, potentially, we have this great data set where we have these metabolites measured for these children. So 100 metabolites around about in each cohort. And I thought, okay, well, what if we could find a fingerprint of screen time, because these metabolites are often dysregulated and there's lots of studies that have shown, for example, in obesity or diabetes, that these metabolites are a little bit skewed. So I was thinking okay, well, what if screen time in itself might cause sort of a disturbance in these metabolites? And what if we could quantify that, and what if we could measure that? So the way we did that was we trained what's known as kind of like AI, but it's not quite AI, but it's called machine learning. And we trained this model where we said, okay, based on one of the groups of children, can we find a fingerprint of screen time in this blood test of 100 different bloods? And we found that yes, screen time did seem to show an increase in certain metabolites. These metabolites are often associated with obesity-related outcomes, so that was not terribly unsurprising. And then we used this model and predicted, okay, based on this blood test, this metabolite score in the other cohort, which is completely new, can we actually predict screen time? So can we use a blood test to predict screen time? And we could, and we showed statistically that you can, using sort of self-reported screen time. So the parents were asked how many hours of screen time did the children see a day, and we were able to predict completely in the other cohort that there was this blood test would work in that scenario. Of course, it would be easier just to ask the other group of children how much screen time did they see, but the proof of the concept was that screen time may be causing some sort of disruption in metabolites, that it's actually measurable and quantifiable, and that we can see that across these 2 different groups of children.
So you're saying that there's actually something you can identify in the blood that can show you how much screen time kids are experiencing, or that they're experiencing too much. Is that correct?
Yes, but and I suppose to further contextualize it, the motivation for looking at this was because we know that these blood tests are dysregulated with all of these cardiometabolic outcomes, these cardiovascular disease risk factors. So this is sort of like a proof of concept that we saw throughout this study that these associations exist. So it's not terribly surprising, therefore, that we can use screen time itself to capture these sort of obesity related outcomes with screen time. So it may not, the interpretation of this may not be that, okay, we actually see screen time itself, but we're seeing the patterns that screen time in childhood are associated with. So we see, these risk factors. We see children who see more screens are potentially more overweight. We're capturing this sort of whole complex pattern of behavior in early life through this blood test.
It's just so interesting to me that this can become so predictable. I am also interested to hear a little bit about what you learned about sleep in the study.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we tried to, throughout this study, take away these factors from the analysis. We tried to say, okay, well, we really just want to see this connection with screen time. So we accounted for diet, we accounted for physical activity, we accounted for sleep. But it's also interesting to think about, okay, well, what if this relationship with screen time on these cardiometabolic risk factors, what if it's actually contextual? What if it's actually dependent on the diet or dependent on physical activity? So for example, if children saw screens, but they actually ran, adequate amount of physical activity during the day, then it didn't really matter this how much screen they saw. And we didn't actually see any contextual variables in this relationship with regard to diet or physical activity. But for sleep, we found that the children that slept enough, so they had enough sleep, they didn't actually have this association between screen time and cardiometabolic risk. And what that suggests perhaps, and we also saw that the children that saw screen time are going to bed later. So the more screen time that they saw, the later they were going to bed. So what this perhaps suggests is that either that sleep is protective of this association, of this connection. So getting enough sleep gives your body the restoration it needs so that you're not having this potential damage. Or it may be what we're seeing is that screens sort of detrimental mechanism is actually through pushing sleep, the sleep window later. So kids are maybe being stimulated by screens, the blue light, which is affecting their circadian rhythm. It may be that they're, on Snapchat or TikTok until 11 p.m. and that very stimulating content is keeping them awake and then they're not sleeping. And one thing about kids, specifically school kids, is that they have a fixed waking period. Mom and dad's going to come in and wake them up at 7:30 or 8 a.m. So they, no matter what, doesn't matter when they go to bed, they're waking up at that time. But we actually saw this across both cohorts. Even the 18-year-old children as well had this sort of contextual relationship with sleep. So it suggests that sleep may be protective, or that screen time's sort of damage with regard to cardiometabolic risk is through sleep, through pushing So one of the takeaways from the study could be considering as a parent cutting screens after dinner. No blue light, no stimulating content. Read a book, relax in the evenings, and then let your body naturally settle into sleep.
Yes, yeah, that's fascinating. That's why I think even when groups disagree on how much screen time kids should be getting, everybody seems to agree that we have to protect sleep. It's so important. So it does seem to be a bit of a vicious cycle, though, because the blue light and the content in the screens kind of stimulates the system so much, and then they're not getting sleep, and so then we end up with these cardiometabolic effects also. But so knowing the results, what are your hopes for next, for moving forward? I think I read somewhere that you might be looking at what behavioral interventions at reducing screen time, improving sleep could mitigate this. Is this a future study, or what are your hopes next?
Yeah, I mean, so everything that we've talked about so far has been from this one study where we use this group of children, and it's an observational study, and that just means that we've watched the kids from a distance and seen what they're up to. Sort of the gold standard of science is to do an intervention, is to do something about this. So often studies like this observational study motivate further studies in the future to say, okay, well, isn't it super interesting, this sleep connection, or isn't it super interesting, this? And these findings can sometimes motivate an intervention. So that may look like, okay, let's take a group of 400 kids and 200 of them, we let them continue as normal with their everyday lives, but 200 of them, we have a strict rule where they don't have any screens after dinner, or a maximum of follow the guidelines, a maximum of 2 hours of screens a day, whatever it may be. And then you would follow these children up for a specific outcome. It could be some of these risk factors, it could be mental health outcomes, whatever it may be, the area of interest. Could be both, probably, because these studies are quite expensive. And then from that, you would get a higher quality of evidence because the individuals would be randomized and you wouldn't be subject to all these other sort of lifestyle covariates or confounders. So that is not something that I personally am actively seeking to do this study right now because I'm working on other fields at the moment. But I've actually recently talking to Trina. I know there may be a larger sort of grant application in the future looking at this area, including intervention works sort of across Europe because this is something I've learned from this study coming out in the Journal of American Heart Association, and sort of the traction it got is that this is a very hot topic. And there's a lot of parents out there, myself included, that are very interested in it. So it's an area to keep your eye on. Yeah.
This has been fascinating, and I'll direct the next question to Professor Trina. But I want to make a comment before this about what I'm hearing from you, and this is my personal anecdotal experience. So I'm an adult cardiologist. I don't practice with children, which means that I see people, and what I do, I work in an urban large center in Philadelphia that has a lot of inequity and a lot of different problems, especially in minorities, that they have more so lack of education, lack of resources, lack of access to specific nutrition, and a lot more cardiometabolic risk factors, high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, a lot of different things, sleep apnea, which is also related to the sleep. So the alarming thing, and I'm thinking about it when you're talking, is the fact that you're talking about kids who are 10 until 18, that it could be that because of screen or excessive screen, doesn't matter where they are in the world, they are exposed to, and it doesn't, I'm not even talking about why, if it's the sleep, it's the lack of activity, it's a different issues, combination of all of it, but it's causing more obesity. Obesity by itself, we know, is causing a lot of sleep disturbances that cause, insulin resistance, diabetes, high sugars, cholesterol, etc. And the outcome is not that far away from children, because I deal with adults, and it used to be when I first practiced, or depending on where I practice, you see the heart attacks, people in their 50s, 60s, but now more and more, this age is being pushed. And I'll tell you, sometimes at first I was shocked a few years ago, but I'm still surprised, but I'm no longer shocked when I see a young man with morbid obesity, which is a combination of, there's no judgment, it's just a medical term, combination of height and weight, BMI, and a young person in their 20s that is coming with a heart attack because they have uncontrolled high blood pressure, uncontrolled diabetes, some genetic predisposition. But that difference between early adulthood, heart attack in the 20s and 30s, and the impact of behavioral things that can be modified as a child, as a teen, is that bridge is not that far. These kids that you're talking about, who are now 17 and have a lot of exposure to screens, obesity, etc., they may have true cardiac complications that I will be seeing: heart failure, high blood pressure crisis, heart attacks, a lot of different things. And that is why it's so alarming to me. It's not just a matter of potential cardiac risk factors. These kids are becoming adults, and this disease, based on their risk factors, hits them earlier than expected.
Yeah, the two brief things I would like to take away from what you're saying, but one of them is also just about parental responsibility. Like, part of the reason why this story is so surprising is because we know a lot of these damages happen that you're talking about with cardiovascular disease happen in early life, and parents and sort of the family dynamic have such a huge influence. We know from other studies that the habits you make in life they develop early, they are rooted in childhood and adolescence. So what is surprising about this study is that we already see that these habits are having these connections with risk factors in themselves, that as you're describing, this sort of umbrella of obesity that you see in the clinic. You mentioned the age of 20, in the 20s. I was thinking early 30s is crazy as well, but so that, I think that's also part of the reason why it's we've seen all these connections with mental health, but it does seem to be having, it may be having an effect in with regard to physical health or cardiovascular disease. And the last thing I would say is, what similar to this metabolite score I was talking about with Katie, another analysis we did in this study was that we looked at an adult population. So we looked at this huge population of adults in the UK, 100,000 adults, And they followed the adults up for 20 years. So they know which of these adults had heart attacks, cardiovascular disease. And they had a blood test at baseline, this same metabolite blood test. So that I was able to, in the study, train a model to say, okay, well, based on the blood test, which of these adults had cardiovascular disease? So I did that and found the metabolites that were more associated with cardiovascular disease. I then took those same metabolites and predicted in childhood, okay, well, based on these adults already in childhood at the age of 10, at the age of 18, um, is screen a predictor for this score? And at the age of 18 it was, and at the age of 10 it nearly was statistically significant. It was like directionally the same. And this suggests, already these sort of habits, this screen habit with all that comes with it, less physical activity, the sleep disturbance, all of those things. Like we know cardiovascular disease this atherosclerosis starts in early life. It's sort of a metabolic process that accumulates over time. It suggests that these habits also in early life are probably taking root there alongside. So, yeah.
That, totally correct. It's actually not only just the buzzword in cardiology, just for everybody's attention is knowledge, is inflammation. And I don't know what the metabolites, if it's related to, but basically all these conditions that are related to obesity and high blood pressure and diabetes, et cetera, what they're causing, one of the problems with them is they cause chronic inflammation. Your body is almost always under some sort of a higher level of inflammation. And that causes a lot of issues, including the plaque accumulation that starts in your coronary arteries at a young age. This became a conversation about cardiac, but I don't want to I don't want to put a cardiology hat. So my next question to Professor Trina is this. You've been listening on mute for a long time to this study, but I'd love to hear, because when I contacted Dr. David, at first, one of the things he said, I said, maybe we should have a webinar. He said, I know exactly who to involve. Somebody who is doing so much research, not about smartphones specifically, but about childhood and things that are actively happening. And you were part of not only the guidelines in Denmark about all these screens and stuff, but you do so much research, including this research. So what are your thoughts? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing, what you're interested in, and what your thoughts are about the study and what was spoken.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for the presentation, also to you, Katie. Yeah, my name is Trine. I'm a professor at the National Institute of Public Health at the University of Southern Denmark. I'm a professor in child psychological development. And for 15 years, I have been doing research, a lot of different research, but one of my main areas have been to do research in intelligence development and personality development. So I have been especially interested in how factors early in life and in early childhood shape the development, our cognitive development and personality development. So my main vision is to uncover how factors in early life affect our psychological development and our health. So I've been doing that for a long time. My interest in screens arose, I think maybe like you, Katie, 10 years ago, before all this fuss about screen use, because I was doing so much research in the development of intelligence and how early it starts. Like we did studies on birth weight is a predictor of intelligence, for example. It's better to be a large baby than a small baby. That's one of the things we established. We also established that the sooner you walk, the more intelligent you are 50 years later. So we have these longitudinal data showing a lot of how early developmental milestones in the first years of life are associated with intelligence 50 years later. So these results are based on some of the oldest birth cohorts in the world that we have in Denmark. We have these data. So these people are today, I think, 65 years old, and we're still collecting data on them. So, but while doing these studies, I would, in my personal life, look at the tendency to to see very small children in strollers with iPads when they went shopping with mom and dad in the supermarket. Suddenly, no kids screaming in the supermarket because they would sit with an iPad. And also at restaurants, you would see small children being paralyzed with their parents' phone or an iPad. So I just started thinking about like this must have an impact on their early development, on their milestones, their ability to talk, to speak and make a sentence, which is the main thing we found to predict intelligence, was the age you have when you can say a sentence of 3 words. That was one of the most important milestones, actually. And to do that, it takes a lot of interaction with other people and adults. So, and the more these kids sit with an iPad, I thought, the less words are exchanged between them and other people. So it must affect their cognitive development. So I think it was 10 years ago that I applied the Danish Research Council for the first time on a large project on screen use. And it was rejected because they thought it was too negative. So the comments were like, why would this be a negative thing? That the hypotheses that I had were too negatively framed, and that they thought it was, not interesting. And that was 10 years ago. So I still think about that sometimes, because later on, that same study that I applied for, is now financed, and they just I just resubmitted another. I got several grants on the same study now. So, but 10 years ago it wasn't interesting. But yeah, so now I'm leading. I think it's the largest Danish national study on screen use, which was the one that I applied for 10 years ago. Now it's funded, and it's called the Digital Child Study. So we invited basically all children in Denmark who turned 4 years within 6 specified months of a year. So all parents of those children in Denmark were invited. And so we got responses from around, I think it was 38% of them. So we have responses from 12,000 parents of these children. And maybe I'll get the chance later on to show you some more details on how we did this study, where we followed them up for a year. But yeah, so now I'm doing studies on screen use, and I think that's also why I was asked to be part of the expert group to establish the Danish national guidelines.
And we are so glad that you stuck with it for all that time, because many of the people probably watching this have experienced the same thing. This was not interesting 10 years ago, and people looked at me like I had 2 heads, and I didn't have a PhD to back up what I was saying. But it is so interesting because the research that I've followed about young children shows problems with attachment with caregivers, fine motor skills, emotional regulation, language development, like you mentioned, all of these key things that kids really need. And it is so serious, but you also hit the nail on the head. It's so difficult in how to discuss this. We really need to find ways to approach parents and get them involved. So I'm so glad that you're doing this study and continuing with it. Is this what, Yair, do you have some of her slides to go through, or is this a good time for that, or should we?
Yeah, I think it's a good time. So let me just share the screen, and Trina, you can just 1 second.
Yeah.
I hope I can get it to work. Can you see my screen of the digital child?
Yes.
Okay, so I will be, if I make it big, it actually, so I'm gonna have to do it this way. I can't do a full presentation. So why don't you start and tell us about this, the overall aims of the digital child, because I think it's super relevant to the conversation. So I agree with Katie.
Yes. So, well, the overall aim of the Digital Child Study is that, like, we assume that screen use of course, is affected by the family and the home environment. And then we want to investigate how screen use affects the socio-emotional development and also the cognitive development, and also how the family and home environment affects screen use. So what we did, I can say did, because the last data collection was finished 1 week ago. So 1 week ago we finished the data collection. But what we did was we sent out questionnaires to children 4 years of age or their parents through, in Denmark, every citizen has a personal identification number, and we have this system where you can send out an email in a specified system. This is where you get information on doctor appointments or taxes, but you can also send out invitations for research projects. So you are absolutely sure that people will get this invitation, and you can ask to send it out to, for example, as specific people. So we send out information to parents of 4-year-old children in Denmark who had their birthdays in 6 specified months of the year. And so we sent out a baseline questionnaire when they were 4 years, and then a follow-up questionnaire when they were 4.5 years, and then the last questionnaire when they were 5 years. So, and we measured cognitive development, for example, working memory, language development, and executive functioning. And then social-emotional development, we asked questions about peer relations, emotional regulation, hyperactivity, and behavioral problems. And so our hypothesis is that screen use will affect cognitive development and social-emotional development in different ways. We talk about it in this study, like there are the direct effects and the indirect effects. And the indirect effects are caused by less time devoted to other activities, such as interpersonal relations or playing with peers or being outdoors, playing with toys, etc. That if children spend a lot of time on screens, they will have less time for other things, to practice other things, for example, language development, or like if you think about the situation in the supermarket, if you place a small child in a stroller with an iPad, you might have a nicer shopping trip because you will not have a mad toddler in the stroller, but you will not have a conflict with the child, but the child also learns from having conflicts with the parent. The child also learns something from being bored and all these normal things. And if you provide the child with the screens, there will be less time devoted to all these everyday situations for the child, which will damage the normal development of the child. And then
Just to interject, just to jump in, it's kind of like in a parallel way, it was what David was saying, that we're not necessarily checking how the screens are affecting, but in the world of physical health, cardiovascular, the indirect effects of the screen could be maybe less exercise, poorer sleep, worse nutrition, and that is an indirect negative effect.
Yes, exactly. That's what we named it, indirect effects, because what we mean by direct effects, we mean direct effects of the content on the screen. For example, the fact that fast-paced stimuli, like very fast-paced cartoons or things happening very quickly, that it might condition the brain to expect an intensity which is not something that you would find in the real world, which means that they would get bored by doing regular chores or being in the kitchen with mom and dad, things like that. And also a gravitation toward easily obtains activation of the dopamine reward because of what is happening on the screen. So that's what we would call a direct effect. So, well, this is an overview of, it's a little bit with a lot of information on this slide. But you can see we have 2 waves in order to have enough children. So the first wave started in March 2024, and the second wave started in 2024. So in the first wave, we invited more than 14,000 children. In the next wave, we invited more than 15,000 children, and it ended last week in 2025. Yes, and these are some of the main results from the first wave. So we will be publishing a lot on this cohort. We just recently received a grant to follow up these kids further on, but until now, some of the basic results are that 99% of Danish 4-year-olds use screens, and they use it on average 70 minutes on weekdays and 2 hours on weekend days, meaning that in the weekend, 77% of the Danish children exceed the recommendations of maximum 1 hour per day.
I think that this is, I'm just going to interject again. I mean, this is to
Yeah.
me, just what's written here is just unbelievable. I mean, we often think, we see a lot of the studies coming from Denmark and the statements and the guidelines, etc. But everybody is sharing the same problems, because ultimately, and maybe you'll talk about it later, the guidelines could be the guidelines, the recommendation of the government could be the recommendations, but ultimately 100% or close to 100% of the kids 4 years old use screens. And and what I'm seeing here, the numbers that you describe are like, really bothersome and concerning to me. 50% are on YouTube, more than 70 minutes on weekdays, 2 hours on the weekend days. It's a lot.
Yeah, and this is when they just turned 4. Like
Wow.
this, so they are not close to 5 years. This is from when they just turned 4 years. Yeah. And this is just to show you, like, what we recently got a grant to do is that we will be in 2026 following these kids up in the Danish registries. We have this system in Denmark where everything is registered through the personal identification number. So we will be following up these kids without having to ask the parents again. We can look them up in the registers and to see if children who have been using screens in the preschool, we call this the preschool age in Denmark, because kids in Denmark, they start school when they are the year that they turn 6. So we measure this before they start school. And then when they start school, we will be seeing, investigating whether kids who have been using screens more in the preschool years, if they have more diagnosis or prescription medication or things like that, and also their well-being, because we have data on that when they start school, and if they got school suspension, etc., to try to see how it affects them when they start school, how much screen they used. So yes.
I was really fascinated to learn about the guidelines that you helped to write, Trine, and that Denmark has these established guidelines, and yet they're not being followed that well. So it was really, I was very upset actually when we first spoke about this. I was like, oh my gosh, so what does make the difference? It just shows that the collective action piece that so many of us locally are trying to work on really is so necessary, because we can have government regulations and guidelines. We can have people trying to educate parents. We can have, all these things in place. It's going to take everything. And hopefully some days we can hold the companies accountable for creating products for children that are actually damaging to just about every area of their health and development we can think of: physical health, mental health, social, emotional health, cognitive health. So ultimately, I hope that's where we can go. But right now, it just shows how important it is for parents to educate themselves. And
I have to say that these numbers are from the first wave before the national guidelines were implemented. And that makes this study even more interesting, because they were implemented between the 2 waves. So one of the next studies we will be doing is actually to see if this changed the screen use, because it was implemented in the middle of this data collection.
Awesome.
fascinating.
But we already looked at it a little bit, so I can't reveal the precise numbers. but I think it changed a little bit, but not very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting though. I would
Yeah.
love to hear about those
Yeah.
new numbers. So what about
Katie, are you here? Could I possibly like, if it's possible for me to share my screen, could I like show some data which like supports Trina's data collection?
Absolutely. If you try to share, if it's not working, I'll make you co. Oh, good. It's working.
You can see? Okay. It's just
Give it. Yes, we can see.
okay. This is just it's really briefly like following up what Trina was saying because Trina was looking at these kids in like 2024, where at the age of 4 they were seeing on average 70 minutes a day. And I just want to show some data from these kids that we have from this cohort where we have these previous data. There were 10-year-olds, but we've seen them at 6 years and 10 years and 13 years. So we also have this sort of questionnaire data for these age ranges. So these are kids at 6 years old in 2016 and 10 years old 2020 and 2023 they were like 13 years old, just to get a flavor for like how much screen these kids are seeing. It sort of gives you an idea of like what the screen's time in Denmark is like. So if I hide this, yeah. So at the age of 6 years they were seeing on average 2 hours a week. And you can kind of see the different buckets for males and females between the kids that are seeing less than 2 hours, 2 to 4 hours, or over 4 hours. At the age of 10 years, they're seeing 3.2 hours. That's like 3 hours, 10 minutes or something like that. And most of the kids now are seeing between 2 and 4 hours. And at the age of 13, they're seeing 4.5 hours. So now nearly all the kids are watching over 4 hours of screens a day. So just this sort of trend, the same kids over what's the 7 years are slowly increasing throughout their childhood, seeing more and more screens. And then actually at the age of 13 here, we, as part of this study, actually asked to look at their phones. So we were able to look at their phones the previous 7 days. So on their phones in your settings, it says how many minutes of screen use are you actually using, and it also shows how many times are you turning on your phone and how many notifications are you receiving. So we found that when we actually looked at their phones, the kids were looking at 4.7 hours of sleep, which is very similar to this 4.5. And mostly girls at this, interestingly, at this age range. And with regard to like how many times are they activating their phone, 93 times on average, and the number of notifications these kids, so like, pinging in their pocket a day, at the age of 13, 120 a day. Yeah, so that's I thought that was sort of interesting because that's like if we look at like Trina's, even in early life at the age of 4, 70 minutes. And then I know it's not the same time, but even like nearly 10 years ago, 6-year-olds were seeing 2 hours and then up to 3 hours and then up to 4.5 hours by the age of 13. So it gives like an idea of like, okay, the kids are throughout their childhood being more and more exposed to screen time. Yeah, so and I'm sure Trina will probably also see that in her data when she looks at even the age between 4 and 5. Like they're going to be seeing more screens at 5 than they are at 4, I imagine.
Yeah, that we believe so. We will start to look at the data now. So yeah.
Let me ask a question, Trina, and you're from Denmark, and you live in Denmark, and David, you're also currently living in Denmark for many years. It's not so much a scientific question, but it's more the reality. Like these announcements that kind of splashed, big news all over the world. They hit United States very quickly. The statement of your prime minister that was talking about social media and how she used the word stealing the childhood of our kids. I think it was very powerful that she's taking the time, and the prime minister is actually talking about this directly and talking about, banning social media below this age or that age. You have guidelines. So it's discussed high up in leadership. But my question is this making a splash also on your day-to-day, like your communities, your friends, those with kids, the people that you see who are doing research? Is it impacting them? You mentioned that so far you haven't really seen at least the guidelines, but do you feel that all of these, high-level concerns that are brought up and discussed, is it being translated and permeating into the day-to-day life of the people?
I can just briefly say like I think there is like with smoking overnight, right? it didn't just stop, but there is a bit of a culture shift or a bit of a stigma develops with it over time. And I think like screen is kind of undergoing that process now, where, you know, maybe now it's not okay where it was 10 years ago to have a screen on your kid in the supermarket. Like maybe now, you know, it's not okay. Maybe it's not, maybe as a parent, like you maybe would be, I don't know if the word is like, you know, it's politically correct to say they would be judged, but I don't think like it would be as acceptable, from like a social point of view. So I think there is a bit of a shift undergoing, but I also think it is still a problem for kids, you know, for parents to sort of manage. There's so, you know, all this content that is just made available to them through YouTube or even national TV channels. You know, it is sort of just it is there. It is so readily accessible. Tablets today are so accessible. Everyone has a phone in their pocket all the time. Kids see their parents on the phones all the time. You know, attention is a commodity now. So yeah, don't know what you think, Trina.
I also think it's going very slowly, but
Mm.
it will take a lot of time. But I think there is a shift in culture, but it's difficult to know very much about it because I think it also has to do with the people you are surrounding yourself with. We also see that in our data material that, for example, people who are less educated, their children have a higher screen time, for example. So there's also a tendency maybe towards some groups of people providing where it's more okay to give more screen time, and some groups in the population where it's less okay to give your child a lot of screen time. But you hear those stories in the Danish newspapers about initiatives, for example, in some school classes where all the parents go together and arrange that none of the kids should have a phone until eighth grade, or these initiatives are starting to come up, but they are not very. It's not very often, and I think it will take a lot of time. I think often you hear people defending screen time with like, for example, when it's about small kids, I hear statements such as, well, he's learning a lot of English words, so now he can speak English, or things like that, because suddenly the child can name all the colors in English instead of Danish, or things like that. Or like all the other kids in the class, they have a higher screen use than my kid. He only has 5 hours. All the rest, they have 8 hours, or, statements like that.
Hmm.
I think because the problem is it's so difficult to do something about, so people are defending themselves. Parents are defending themselves because it's too difficult to see that it's almost impossible to do something about it.
It starts conflicts, and at least
Yes.
I'm at a stage of parenting where I have small kids, right? And I hear the next stages of kids when they're older is that these conflicts become, especially with screens, become more and more and more common. I think you have older kids, Trina, so like, you know,
Yes. Yes. A lot. It's a big debate in my home with the screen use. Yes. I think it's the thing that I have most conflicts about with my kids. It's screen use. I think about it like I think about screens sometimes like candy. Like no parent on earth would give their child free access to candy every day and give them candy for dinner or something. But with screens, it's just like, well, my kids really want to use the screen, so he has to use the screen because he really wants to. And I'm like, no, like here we have candy every Friday and every Saturday. And so we have this in the kitchen, we have this drawer full of candy. And so every Friday and Saturday, the kids get a small ball of candy, and we have that together. every Friday and also Saturday. In the old times, it was only Friday, but now it's also Saturday. And so it's something that I decide that, okay, today we are having candy because it's Friday. And it's a decision I make. And maybe we eat too much candy, we probably do. But it's a decision that today is okay. And I think we should think about the same way with screens. Like if my kids could have candy every day, of course they would say, yeah, I want it in my lunchbox. I want it for dinner and I want it after dinner because it tastes really good and I really like it. And should I then just say, okay, my kid really likes candy, so they should have it whenever they want. Sometimes I think there's a tendency to do that with screen use. And I think one day I think we will wake up and think about screens like candy or like smoking or other things that we now know they are unhealthy. And of course, they should not be provided with them whenever they want to. But the culture right now is that, well, what can we do? He really likes his phone. And all the
Right.
other kids have a phone and they use it whenever they want. So
Right. It's also being the tech companies are sort of marketing these things as beneficial for kids and saying, you know, they'll need to gain these skills for their futures. And so that's not helping either because it's making parents, I think, conflicted sometimes, thinking, oh, am I holding my child back if I don't give them an iPad when they're really young or a smartphone? Will they be left behind? And they're actually doing a real disservice to kids. But I am curious, Yair, do we have time for another question or?
We do have time, but I just wanted to comment on Katie on what you said. I think that you're spot on. I mean, it's like parents are confused. Everybody's confused because we don't know. That is why it is so essential to have people like Trina and David who are researchers. I mean, this research that needs to be negotiated eventually and brought, you know, to everybody is critically important. In our next webinar, we're going to host the leader of a huge study that was done over 20,000 kids in India, you know, meticulous study. And what it basically showed, it was just basically published, and it's caused a storm in The Economist, the Times, everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. What it showed is that if you allow smartphones in schools versus if you don't allow, you ban all smartphones before, you know, the first bell until the end, that there is a difference in outcomes, like a strong study that shows your kids will do better if they don't have access to this during school. We need people like you. We need the data to explain and fight back to all the huge industry that is pushing all their devices. They want the attention of our kids. They need it in order to survive, and of us as adults. So we have to push back, and we need to educate with studies. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Katie. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we need to do everything we can to protect childhood and protect learning. I totally agree. So I did read that in Denmark, the Well-Being Commission in 2023 started to talk about banning phones in schools, but then I also read that it hadn't taken effect yet. Is that, can you guys clarify, did it take effect that there's no phones in schools?
no, it will start in August 26.
Okay.
Yes.
So next school year. And then
Next school year.
and now they're also talking about banning social media for all kids under the age of 15. When do you think that will pass? Is there any opposition to this? Or
I think it sounds as if it will pass.
Yeah, I don't
believe
think
it
there's
will
any
pass.
party. There hasn't been any like resistance from what I've heard in the media here. Like it seems like it was also part of her sort of introduction speech at Parliament for the year. So I think it was kind of
Yeah.
designed to be like a cross-party, you know, everyone would agree on this, like a sort of a settled, you know, we're doing good stuff type thing. But so it'll be discussed and a bill will be put forward next year, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
And it will be a ban for kids under 15, but parents can opt their kids in from 13. So if you were a parent and you know you're getting these comments like Trina's saying, and they want their candy, their parents can register. But I think that'll be an active process. I imagine that'll be designed. And this hasn't all been, you know, it's not implemented, but I imagine it'll be an active process where a parent has to willingly log on, register their children, it won't be a
That is so wrong, because then you again put the responsibility on the parents, and then if the rest of the school class, if
yeah.
they are allowed to do it, I think, I don't like that 13-year-old. That it should just be 15-year-old, because yeah.
But
Yeah,
it
but there
does
is
help parents who are a little bit educated about these things, because at least they can say, well, technically the rules are that you shouldn't have it till 16. So at least it gives parents a little
yeah.
bit of a leg up. One thing I have always said for years is that parents right now are being asked to manage devices that are intentionally designed to be unmanageable, and it's not a fair fight for parents. So
No.
we need, we need all the help we can get. We need your research. We need groups like Pennsylvania Unplugged all over the country are trying to bring parents together to find each other to make these changes together. But that would be really fascinating changes for Denmark next year if there's less social media for kids and no phones in schools at all. Hopefully you'll have some amazing research in the next few years that shows
I bel-
benefits.
I believe Australia has passed or is passing a bill as well. Is that right? Yeah,
We
for
already did, yeah,
they
under
did, yeah.
16.
Under 16, yeah.
I think it's a full-on ban.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it'll
I
also be interesting. It'll also be interesting to see what comes out of that with regard to like, because there's going to be a lot of 14 and 15-year-olds who will know how to circumvent that. There was something in this news article that came out from Denmark that like over 90% of kids under 13 have access to some form of social media in Denmark already. So like
Yeah.
it's these kids aren't going. I can't imagine these kids are going to just go cold turkey day to day. So it'll be interesting to see how the law shift things. I think as you were saying with at the start of your when you were introducing yourself, Katie, with like I think like it is researchers are the sort of people on the ground who, as you hear alluded to, like look at the data and try to tease it out. But not it's the policy level that really makes the difference. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
So I have
Yeah.
a question for you. I mean, we're close to time. We just have a few more minutes to talk, and this has been fascinating. I can talk to you all day long. But there's an excellent question from the attendees that I'm going to read in a second. But a question specifically to David. So I think that, talking to you and hearing about Denmark, hearing from different states in the United States, this is a problem that exists, and it's kind of, despite the different languages, culture, etc., it's happening everywhere. I'm from Israel originally and have family there and friends. It's the same. I wanted to know, David, how are things, because you're originally, and I'm sure you still have family and friends in Northern Ireland, in Belfast area. What is the experiences over there? Are they facing similar challenges? Because it's part of what we want to do is to learn like what's happening globally.
yeah, it's no different. It's everything what you're saying and more. It's I think Northern Ireland is one of the more socially disadvantaged areas of the UK. And I think like it's probably more prevalent there than in Denmark, but it is just a tool parents also use to, take a break before they make dinner, or, and kids have access to it, and it's part of, as I was growing up, if you had a Nokia, what was it, 3310 or something, that was the top of the range phone when you were like 9 or 10 years old. And now like kids are having smartphones earlier. I mean, it is prevalent as far as I am aware throughout the Western world and probably in the Eastern world. So it is a bit of an epidemic if you wanted to look at it like that,
It
especially
is.
for kids. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. And the way that I'm thinking about it is it's a great question. I'm going to ask this question to all of you because all of you are involved in research and practical things like Katie is doing with work with multiple organizations. So I'm going to ask all of you as the final answer to answer this question, including Katie. So the question was, the person was curious to see, what is your opinion? Based on your knowledge, your work, everything, how do you think the world is going to be changing maybe, in 5-10 years? Not globally in terms of how the world, politics, etc., but specifically with screen times and social media. Do you think that we're going to start seeing with more and more research like yourselves, more and more initiatives and group and organizations, we're going to see kind of like a resistance to this, or this is kind of inevitable, especially given the power of all these huge companies and Google and Facebook and Meta, et cetera, et cetera. So would you say that what would should change our perspective for determining the average screen time? What do you think maybe the future will be, that the average screen time will be no longer normal and something much more miniature will be considered normal? So final thoughts, Trina.
Oh, I'm the first one to go. I am optimistic. I think that maybe not in 5 years, but maybe in 10, 15 years, we will think back on screen time and children like we now think about smoking. Like we used to have a world where parents could just smoke directly around their kids and in the car, and they wouldn't think about it. And I think we will see the same. I hope that we will see the same with screens, that people will have more resistance against it. That's what I think we will see. I hope so.
Great. David?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm maybe a little more pessimistic. I think it's here to stay. I think our world is increasingly digital, and I think it's going to persist as a problem. I think there will be more focus on this childhood period. I hope there's more focus on this sort of, especially Trina's sort of real focus, like early childhood, and the potential cognitive and psychological development. I really hope, like Katie, you were talking about, like, you know, this tree and adding flowers and stuff. I really hope there's like people realize there's a potential market here to like have other tools or like other things for young children to activate them in a more stimulating non-screen way. I really hope that develops, but I think screen itself is and the content that comes with it, it's just the world seems to be designed that way. You know, the largest market share in America is all these, you know, tech companies. I feel like our attention is really being, you know, data, you know, mined, and that's kind of like the new economy. I can't see that changing. So I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic, but I do have the same views as Trina. Like I do, for my own kids, like really try to think of screens as smoking. Like it needs to be avoided. It's a treat. It's candy, to be avoided as best as possible. So yeah, that's my answer.
Powerful insights of both of yours. And Katie, I would love to hear from all of your leadership and skills and, you know, things that you have done over the course of the last decade. I would love to hear, what are your final thoughts for today?
Okay, I am cautiously optimistic. When I first started talking about this, I think I mentioned at the beginning, people literally looked at me like I had two heads. And now there's sort of a movement, and there's Pennsylvania Unplugged, there's the Distraction-Free Schools Policy Project, there's Smartphone-Free Childhood, there's Fair Play, which has done so many incredible things in establishing all these groups. So I think parents are sort of onto it now, and we're learning about the persuasive design that's embedded into all these products and programs, and learning that our kids, especially, we also, but our kids are being manipulated for company profit. And I think that can really unite parents, no matter, no matter what your other beliefs are. It's a very uniting force. And I think that's why this is one of the few things in our country, at least, that has bipartisan support that's starting to make changes in Congress at the state level, and hopefully someday at the federal level. So I am very cautiously optimistic that I think it's parent-led so far, but I believe that
Increasingly being legislated. I think that's really needed. And that was needed for smoking as well. And that's, you know, sugar taxes show the same thing. You know, it needs to be regulated to some degree, or, like what's happening in Denmark, what's happening in Australia, these type of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and to come full circle, your study about cardiometabolic health, I think, is going to be one of the key things that we'll look at, in the future and say, okay, this is something we have to act on. We can't, we might never be able to say causation, right? But there's correlation in physical health, mental health, social emotional health, cognitive health. At what point do we have enough correlational evidence that we can all start to act? So I feel like we're getting there.
And I think I'll just finish the session by saying that even interactions like we're having now, like the way that I see it is that, like Katie was saying, there's different organizations. Some of them started 10 years ago. Some of them started just in the last few years. The Anxious Generation book of Jonathan Haidt gave a huge push to this movement in the last 2 years since it was. So what I see is all these little circles are on the map are growing and starting to touch each other, sometimes merging. And, you know, even conversations like this, we're talking, look at this. I'm from Israel originally. Katie is American. David is originally from Northern Ireland. Trina, of course, is from Denmark. And we're talking to each other. And I think that this national, state-wise, and also global network of people who feel very strongly about this is true grassroots, you know, complemented, of course, by strong research like the two of you are doing, and complicated by amazing organizations like Katie is forming, and legislation. So bottom line, I'm also optimistic. But I wanted to thank you very much. Listen, I mean, I'd love to see, I think I would love to hear maybe arrange another meeting, not on a Super Bowl day, but maybe in the next few months to see if things are changing, follow up along what's happening in Denmark with the, with the changes like you're describing in the schools and the ban and the social media, etc. We'd love to stay in touch and continue collaborating with you. So I wanted to thank everybody, Professor Trina, Dr. David, and Katie for always being so amazing. And thank you very much. The recording will be available for those who are interested.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Have a good night, everybody in Denmark.
Yeah.
Thank
Well
you.
done. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.